offline.
I'll say this for him, he's consistent.
Well, he's been so consistent all year.
Not the taste, consistency.
Consistently, yes.
Consistency!
Thanks, losers.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Consistency Show, part of Big Guy Fantasy Sports. I am Bob Lung, and on the other line with me, as always, is Mr. Ron Rigney. Ron, how's it going?
All right, Bob, how's it going with you?
Doing well. It's actually gotten into the low 70s here this past week, so that's beyond balmy for us. It was almost scary how warm it was for a couple days. Of course, it's also rained for like 5 straight days, and we're in a big flood watch, and my backyard looks like a swimming pool, but I don't care. It's warm. I don't care. As long as it's not snow, it's no worries to me. So I'm sure it's still warm down your neck of the woods, yes?
It was only 87 today. I think it was
87.
a potential
Jeez.
record for today. Yeah, but you know what, though? I don't want to complain because I know there's people that are in places that are in the single digits and whatnot and have had a cold winter, but it's not supposed to be 87 in February, even in Florida, I don't think. So that's a little bit on the warm side, but we'll take it, I guess.
Yeah,
we'll struggle through. We'll struggle through.
Yeah. You'll have the 90s and 100s in the middle of the year, and you'll be complaining it's too hot. So I get it.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's all good. It's all good. So all right. So our last of our group of awards for the year. And this week we're going to do the tight end. And let's be honest, tight ends this year, it's funny because a lot of people I've heard complain that this was a terrible year for the tight ends. What are your thoughts?
I kind of thought that before I dove a little bit deeper into the numbers when I was doing my research here. And I think there was more quality tight ends than people kind of gave credit for. I mean, there wasn't, tight end's a position that you're not going to get huge running back type stats for the most part, but I don't think it was, I think it's one of those things that looks worse on the cover than it does than when you start to dive in and kind of actually look at the numbers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and it makes perfect sense, which is what everybody was saying. It's like, this is the worst year. Oh my gosh, if you didn't have Kelsey or Gronkowski or Ertz, you were having an awful year, blah, blah, blah. And I'm here to tell you, folks, it wasn't that bad. In fact, just to throw out some numbers. So, obviously, we're looking at the consistency of the fantasy football players out there. And you can go to bigguyfantasysports.com. You can check out the consistency report. And you can put in your own scoring method. But we're looking at your traditional PPR. And what I want to bring up first is 2016. So, in 2016, there were only 2 tight ends that were over 65% consistent. One of them was Kyle Rudolph, who was 75, who did play all 16 games. The other one was Jordan Reed, but only played 12 games. So that means everybody else, Travis Kelce, Greg Olsen, Jimmy Graham, Eifert, Walker, Zach Ertz, all were 63% or lower in consistency. Of the guys who played at least, let's say, over 10 games or over 12 games, only 4 of them were over 60%. So 4 over 60 and 1 over 70. Okay? So that's 5. This year, there were 9 total over 60%, and there were over 65%, there were 7. No, I'm sorry, 8. So in my mind, this was a tremendous year for the consistency in tight ends, but yet, all I heard, just like you, was, if you didn't have this person or that person, you were having a terrible year at tight end. Well, numbers speak for themselves, folks, and consistency-wise, there are actually some really good ones out there, and some that you may not realize. And we're going to talk about them in some of our awards tonight, but there were also some guys who had some really bad years, had a really bad year, and we're going to start off with our first category for our awards tonight. We call this the worst value. I know awards are not supposed to be negative, but, well, in fantasy football, there's just going to be guys that just didn't pull their weight, and the worst value is certainly what this award is all about. And worst value is going to go to the tight end that had the highest ADP at the beginning of the year, but ended the season with the worst combination of total fantasy points and consistency, therefore making him the worst value at tight end in 2017. So, Ron, we do this every week, and we start off with you with how about throwing out a nomination for the worst value of the year at tight end?
First nomination I'm going to throw out is a guy that every year it seems like I don't understand why people keep just trying so hard to make this guy happen, and he hasn't quite happened just yet. It's been a combination of because he's a guy that I looked at his numbers and I thought that he would be injured a little more than what he was, but his games played is pretty consistent over the last few years. He actually played all 16 games in 2017, but I don't know what the big deal is with this guy unless it's, his quarterback should make him better or whatever, and that's Eric Ebron. Eric Ebron's a guy that I mean, if you got him low enough in your draft, he might have put up a little value for you, but he was a guy sitting there with ADP number 9 off the board as far as tight end, and he ended up being our 20th most consistent guy and then 13th in total points. And overall body of work, when you look throughout his career, it seems like he either does he scores you touchdowns one season or he gets you yards one season. It's kind of one or the other. You look at his numbers from last year. He had 53 grabs, 574 yards, 4 touchdowns. Little down from the yardage from last year, and he only had 1 touchdown in 2016. I say last year, but we're talking 2016 here. But just overall, not a guy I'm not really sure as to what it is about him. I mean, he's a good athlete. He plays in a good offense. He should be a lot better than what he is, and I'm not really sure why he's not living up to that billing. Why he's not that that guy that we want every year to be at the top of the leaderboard there. So I'm not real sure what Eric Ebron's issue is. I'm not real sure if it's I don't know. Like I said, I thought it would be something with injury, but he's played quite a few games. So I'm throwing Eric Ebron out there first. I just don't get it with him every year. Yeah,
and every year he gets drafted, or his ADP always seems to be in the top 12, and yet his consistency has never been there. Believe it or not, this has been one of his better years. No, I shouldn't say that. 38%, that's not what is better. But I don't know if he's ever been over 50. He did end the season with 3 out of 4 clutch games at the end of the year. I think week 17, obviously, we'll throw out. So we'll just say he ended the year with 3 straight. He looked good and at times has had some very nice games. But he just never has put it together. Whether it's the fact that there's just so many other talented receivers between Golden Tate, Marvin Jones, the backfield of can't think of his name. I went brain dead. Theo
Riddick.
Theo Riddick. Thank you, Theo Riddick in the backfield. So there's a lot of guys to throw to. Ebron's just never been one of the guys, but like you said, great talent. So what I'm going to throw out there is. Greg Olsen, he started the year, he was right up there, tight end number 3. He did have his injuries, but if you still throw those out, he was 1 for 7 in the games he did play. Now, maybe he wasn't 100% healthy. We assume that. The only game he really had a great game was like week, I want to say 15, which is the week I didn't play him in the Fantasy League of Experts in the semifinals, and if I would have played him, instead of that damn Jared Cook, I would have won the whole freaking league because I would have made the finals and I would have kicked ass in the finals. But no, I didn't play him because the week before when he came back and was, quote, allegedly healthy, he had 1 catch for 3 yards. And I'm like, okay, fine. He's not going to play and they're not going to use him then. I'm not going to play him. So I put Jared Cook in, and Cook didn't do what he needed. He's needed to score 7 points. While, if I'm not mistaken, I think Olsen had like 7 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown. Typical Greg Olsen, but that was the only time all year. So he's one of my nominees for this worst value. How about any more from you?
You stole mine with Greg Olsen as far as and it's one of those things too. You can't chalk it up, because consistency takes into account the what you did in the games that you were in there, and he definitely did not perform in those games that he was in there. On a side note, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that we're probably going to mention Jared Cook a little bit later on, probably not in such a positive light. Just going to throw that out there.
Probably not.
Yeah. So other than that, just Greg Olson was my second one there. I think he's by far the other guy up there, but he's definitely not as high up as our winner there. So
Right. Well, and we do have a tie, so I'm going to throw out the last nomination and say that this guy actually ties Greg Olson, and that's Jordan Reed for our winner for worst value. They both were top tight ends at the beginning. Like I said, Greg Olson, tight end 3 is the ADP. Jordan Reed was tight end 4. Now, everybody knows Jordan Reed is an injury-prone problem. But it's just obviously getting worse and worse. But even when they did play, Reed went 3 for 6. As we said, Olsen went 1 for 7. You could probably say Olsen really is the true winner here. But both of them were right up there. And even when they did play this year, just didn't seem to bring any value at all. It'll be interesting to see where both of them fall this year. My thought is Reed won't even be in the top 12 ADP wise. Olsen may still be there, but I'm going to not touch him this year at all. Yes, he's been very consistent prior to 2017, but I think he's seen better days. I think the injuries are starting to get to him, and I just think his time is coming due, and I'm not going to touch him at all in 2018. So there's our winners for worst value, a tie between Greg Olson and Jordan Reed. Any chance you'll be drafting Jordan Reed at all, unless he's like last pick of the entire draft?
No, and I look at Jordan Reed as one of those. I call him one of those Charlie Brown guys. He does just enough that like in the Charlie Brown cartoons where Lucy's gonna hold the football and Charlie's gonna, I'm not gonna do it. You're gonna pull the football, and she convinces him every time, and every time she pulls it out. Jordan Reed to me is the same way. He does just enough to keep you kind of coming back and wanting to draft him, and you're like, oh well, this is the year. Maybe if he stays healthy, maybe he can get it done. And it's too big of an if. It's too big of a risk, and you have to look, just at the overall body of work of his career. I mean, he's been more of a injury problem than not. And we kind of talked about it, before with some of the guys we've mentioned in previous podcasts. And it's always like some nagging thing with him. I think we talked about it when we were talking about Keenan Allen and the wide receivers. Keenan Allen, when he's injured, he's definitely injured. It's not like a strained eyelid or a hangnail or something. I mean, it's legit stuff. So I think that's the one thing you got to worry about with Jordan Reed too. It just seems like it's this nagging stuff. And there's no denying it. When he is healthy, he's spot on. I mean, he's one of the top guys at the position. But it's not worth it to pay that price when you get maybe – in a good year, maybe 8-9 games from him, when you can maybe draft a combination of guys. If you go down a little further, you draft like maybe you get, my boy Jack Doyle from Indianapolis. You pair him with somebody like Austin Hooper or Cameron Brate or somebody further down, and just play matchups. Or you might even get Kyle Rudolph further down and reap the benefits of that. So I just don't think he's worth the price, and I think there's still going to be people that will pay it, and I will gladly let them pay it because I'm definitely not.
Right, I agree. One of the things that's interesting. Well, we'll wait because he's going to come up as a winner in one of our categories later. So we'll bring him up later. So we'll move on. All right. So now we're going to switch over and go to a positive factor here. We're going to go to the best value at tight end. So this is the opposite. This is the guy who probably had one of the lowest ADPs at the beginning of the year, may not have even been drafted, and end the season with the best combination of total fantasy points and consistency. This year's winner is going to surprise some people, so I'll let you throw out a nomination. If you want to pick him, that's fine, and we'll take it from there. But big surprise this year for this winner.
Well, don't cut off my feed here, but I mean it was kind of a no-brainer at this one as far as who we're going to go with here. I got Evan Engram coming with this one, because when you look at where he was drafted, he's the 16th guy off the board at the position. So a lot of drafts, he was your backup tight end if you take a backup tight end, which I know a lot of people do not. So he wasn't even your starter going in for the most part, unless you really, really waited a long time and you really had some sort of like ESP or something to know that he was going to do well. But he ended up as our fifth most consistent tight end. He was 8th in total points. And I think that what makes it a little more impressive is he was able to kind of do this without Eli Manning having one of his better years. And he was still able to be, very consistent. He was able to produce just about every week. He ended up with 6 scores, ended up with 64 grabs, 722 yards, and we'll talk in weeks to come about how rookies are so not consistent, and it's in the book, and the numbers speak for themselves, kind of like you said. Mm-hmm. But he was able to kind of buck that trend and put up numbers of more of a veteran guy as opposed to a rookie tight end. So like I said, I think it speaks volumes the fact that he was able to do that with some spotty quarterback play as well.
Totally agree. But I'm going to do it one better, and I'm going to tell you who the winner is, and I'm going to tell you why, because this guy was the tight end 31 at the beginning of the year ADP-wise. In fact, if he was drafted on anybody's league, unless it's a 3 tight end starter league, I can't imagine this guy was drafted at all. The interesting fact is this guy just a couple years ago did almost the exact same thing in New Orleans. His name is Ben Watson. And Ben Watson is played for the Baltimore Ravens, for those of you who probably forgot where he was even playing anymore. But like I said, wasn't drafted, and yet ended the year only 4 percentage points behind Evan Ingram. He was at 69% for the year, ranked total points, ranked 11th, 11 of 16 in quality games, or clutch games, 7th, basically tied for 6th, at 69% with Delaney Walker, and was only 4 percentage points below Evan Ingram. I mean, I looked at this. I actually double-checked these numbers because I'm like, I trust my system, and I know it's always right, but I'm like, did Ben Watson really have that good of a year at tight end? And he did. And I don't know if anybody probably played him at all, in this year. Maybe later in the year when people were starting to realize that, hey, this guy's actually doing pretty well week after week. Now, he did earn 7 of the 11 in the first half. Now, by then, maybe people thought, oh, that's a fluke, and didn't play much. And to be honest with you, 4 out of 7 of the last, but he did week 15 and 16 earn a clutch game. So if you're using him in your playoffs, he was certainly beneficial. But he, in my mind, wins the best value because basically nobody drafted him. Now, we'll assume he stays with Baltimore. He might be a nice low pick, nice backup to have this year, as I assume Joe Flacco will keep throwing to him as long as Ben Watson stays healthy. But just have to wait and see. But that's our best value. Any winner there? Surprise to you?
Not at all. I mean, when you have a guy that, like you said, wasn't even drafted in most leagues. I mean, who drafts 30 tight ends in their league unless you have a super deep league? Which honestly, with some of the people that we know and that we play with, it's very possible you might have had that. But yeah, it's hands down. He's got to be the best value. The only one that I threw to Evan Ingram.
Yeah, Evan Ingram certainly, like you said, was definitely a good value. I mean, there was a lot of love from him as a rookie tight end, and I totally get that. And but and like I said, the amazing thing about Watson is he did it 2 years ago. He was kind of like came out of nowhere, came floating into New Orleans, and had I think a over 60% consistency that year in New Orleans. But then they let him go and brought Colby Fleener in, and that was a waste. Yeah, Watson just he's just one of those good old veterans that just does his job and stays healthy and did a good job and was certainly the best value. So we won't even bring up a nominee for this because basically you just talked about him and pretty much said everything we need to say. But our rookie of the year is easily Evan Ingram. As you mentioned, Evan had a fantastic year, 6th in total points, 5th in consistency at 73%. He is also only the 2nd tight end since 2010 to even earn over 60% consistency in his rookie year. So Evan Ingram certainly stood out this year and easily ran away with Rookie of the Year honors at tight end. So congratulations to him. And, again, no reason to even put those out because I don't even know if we can find 2 other nominees at tight end that were rookies. O.J. Howard. He wasn't bad. He was 43% consistency. Not bad. Probably would have won. I guess he would have won if it wasn't for Evan Ingram because there wasn't anybody any better. But
yeah, I mean the only ones like you said, O.J. Howard was out there, and then David Njoku is another one that was out there. And he was only at 31%. You look at their stats, and their stats overall aren't great. I think they're both around somewhere around the 400-yard mark, 4 touchdowns apiece, I think is what they had, or 6 for O.J. Howard. But I think the thing that's worth pointing out to them, though, is these guys are such freak athletes that I think that they could definitely become very good at this position, especially O.J. Howard with the, we'll see what they do there in Tampa with the running back spot, but they're putting together a pretty high octane offense, or potentially high octane offense there. And it'll be interesting to see what Cleveland will do with Njoku, but I think whoever they have there at quarterback, he gives whoever that is maybe kind of a nice sneaky little security blanket PPR play for next year as well, right, in the reception department. So we'll go on to see what happens there.
Right. No question. If they bring
definitely not award winners for in this award, that's for sure.
Right. Not that we probably haven't. Not that I probably haven't given an MV or a Rookie of the Year award to a tight end less than 50% in the past, because I'm sure I have. But Evan Ingram certainly ran away with that. So all right, we move on to the clutchless. This is a tight end who ended the season with a high ranking in total fantasy points, but his consistency was lower than expected, therefore making him look more valuable due to his high points rank than he was worth to his fantasy team. So I think there's a few out there that will be pretty easy to pick up. So I'll let you start with your nomination.
First guy I have is one that I had to kind of look a couple of times at this, because I thought, and he's a guy that I didn't own really anywhere. And I remember playing him a few times in DFS in the right matchups. And he was a guy that I thought had a little bit better year than what he really had, and that was Austin Hooper. And not to say that he had a bad year, when you look at overall, but for this award especially, he finished 18th in total points, only 28th in consistency, only 31% consistency. He did play all 16 games, so he was durable, but he was only a clutch performer in 5 of those games, and so he fits this category to a T. For where he went off the board at. And, like I said, I thought he had a better overall season. And when you look at the numbers, not bad. 49 grabs, 3 touchdowns, 526 yards. So not to say that you were expecting Gronkowski-type numbers out of him. And he was more than likely probably a fringy starter. Maybe you had, kind of like I alluded to earlier, you might have swapped him in and out with somebody else you might have had. But I think he's definitely a nominee for this category, just based upon, finishing all the way down at 28th as far as consistency. Right. 27th, I should say. Right.
No, definitely. And I think a lot of people expected a big year out of Hooper, after the playoffs last year or the year before, the great run that Atlanta had in the playoffs. Hooper was, benefiting quite a bit from some of those. But, new offensive coordinator comes in. Excuse me. Offensive coordinator comes in and doesn't use him as much, and obviously kind of just didn't bring in what you would have expected. So one of the guys I'm going to bring up was a guy you mentioned earlier, Jared Cook. Jared was 12th in total points, which looks good. You're like, wow, tight end 1, that's great. Well, except the fact that he only had a 38% consistency rate, and that's not very good. That was 19th overall. It certainly doesn't make him a tight end 1. Like I said, he had some decent games. I'll probably never own him again for the rest of my life after he had his offensive pass interference call that cost me the Fantasy League of Expert title. Not that I'm bitter or anything, but so he's basically on my bad list.
I can see that. I have guys like that too. That they no matter what they do, they could go out and have 100 catches for 2,000 yards, and no, I'm not interested. Don't want them.
Yeah,
bad taste in my mouth.
Cook. And it was a terrible call by the ref. I don't want to even get into it, but he really didn't push off that much. Let's not relive that.
Yeah, let's not relive it. Yeah,
so,
no.
You got one more recommendation here?
Real quick, the only one that I had that he's another one that I thought was a little bit higher up than what he would be on our list. I will say, however, there are some weeks that he definitely did bail me out as far as in DFS and as far as in a couple times where I had bye weeks that I needed a guy and it was kind of sparse out there was Tyler Kroft, and he finished 16th in total points, 18th in consistency, or 17th in consistency, 44%. But I will say there were weeks though that he came through for me with at least one touchdown where I had bye weeks or where I had I had some money I had to save in DFS at a position and I threw him in there. So I will say he was a guy that despite kind of being a nominee for this award, I think he was able to help me, but he was one of those guys too. It seemed like he would have a couple of those weeks where I plugged him in and he would have like the 3 for 13, and he did have the touchdown that bailed you out. Otherwise, it would look like a disaster. So I think he's a guy that it falls in this category. But I will say he was helpful to me at some times throughout the year.
It's going to be interesting in Cincinnati this year with Tyler Eifert, because obviously this is who Tyler Kroft basically replaced for most of the year because of, again, injuries. Tyler Eifert is certainly becoming the Jordan Reed of the AFC. Kroft certainly looked pretty decent. Like you said, 16th in total points. Yeah, he played all 16 games, but he wasn't the starter in all 16 games because Eifert did start off the beginning of the year. But, it's going to be interesting to see if Cincinnati is going to, use them both, or, they're just going to wait for Eifert to get hurt, which we know will happen at some point, and Kroft just won't be, consistent because it'll just be so iffy of when Eifert's going to fill in there. But definitely. But our winner, and we're going to add in a nominee and winner at the same time, because, again, we had another tie. Jared Cook was one of our winners, and your boy Eric Ebron, who ranked 13th in total points. So basically, Cook was 12th in total points. Ebron was 13th in total points. But at the end of the year, they both had a 38% clutch rate, tying for 19th in consistency. They're just not going to be on my teams. I've never been an Ebron fan. The day he hits over 70% consistency in a year, then maybe I'll think about it going into the next year. But I don't think that's ever going to happen. But those guys were the clutch-less of 2017 at tight end. So Clutch Moore, obviously, again, kind of the opposite. They had kind of a low ranking in total fantasy points, but their consistency was higher than expected, thus making them look less valuable to fantasy teams, but they actually might be worth a little more than you think. So we'll let you go first and throw out your nomination for the Clutch Moore tight end of the year.
Well, and this is a guy, too, that overall numbers not that great. And it's a guy that I personally am not a huge fan of. But when I was looking at, just what he did overall for the season, to me, he kind of fit this category quite a bit. And that's Austin Seferian-Jenkins. And he was only 21st in total points, but he did finish 17th or 16th as far as clutch, 46%. And so, when you look at overall across the board, he did have 50 grabs, so that was helpful into PPR. But the yardage numbers were extremely low. He only had 357 yards, but he did get you 3 scores as well. So it's a guy that not setting the world on fire, but he did play 13 games. He did catch you 50 balls in a PPR, and he did score you 3 touchdowns. And you could have done a lot worse with that. But once again, he kind of like you alluded to with Ben Watson, Austin Seferian-Jenkins is a guy that most likely you did not draft in any league, and I'm definitely not touching him ever. He's one of those guys, kind of like you with Jared Cook, because I was big on him a few years ago when he was in Tampa, and he did next to nothing. So he did revive his career a little bit. Now, I don't know if that's going to help him as far as being drafted anywhere next year. He is only still 26 years old, so he still could get his mind right and kind of figure out what he needs to do. But I think he fits this just because I didn't really expect anything out of him, and lo and behold, he's number 16 on our consistency rankings.
Well, and let's be honest, weren't there at least 2, if not 3 touchdowns that were called back on questionable, quote, catch plays in the end zone that got overturned and he didn't get the touchdown? So you throw 3 more touchdowns, 18 more points, that takes him to, 121 in total points. So, he probably could have had another couple clutch games, so may have been in that 50-60% range. So totally agree, certainly has the potential to be a good player. So the one I'm going to throw out here, and is also our winner, is Hunter Henry. Now, Hunter Henry he's one of those guys that just have been difficult to figure out. He seems to be a very talented player, but the problem has been in San Diego or LA, wherever you are with the Chargers. Because of Antonio Gates being around, Hunter Henry's never really gotten to be the full starter for the Chargers. When he came out as a rookie, everybody thought this was, Gates was going to be done, he was going to be out, but it's taken a few years because Antonio Gates is, Antonio Gates, and he's pretty good. He'll probably go in the Hall of Fame. But Hunter Henry last year ranked 14th in total points, which isn't bad, but he did end the year 10th in consistency. It's only 57%, but he did miss a couple games. So, he probably could have been a little bit higher if he played all 16 games. Again, Gates had to get the record for the most touchdowns, for tight end, all that kind of stuff. So now I assume Gates will retire. I'd be surprised if he doesn't, but there's rumors he may not. But if Hunter Henry can get the full-time role for the Chargers in 2018, I have a feeling that might be a guy that I'm going to, if he goes in, the mid-late rounds, that I might be picking him a little bit more than I have in the past. But he also wins the clutch more for the year, and I think will be, could be the guy for next year.
I agree, and I professed my love last week to Keenan Allen when he's healthy. He's one of the best out there as well. And it seems like this whole offense, this whole passing offense, just doesn't get a lot of the love that they deserve with Phillip Rivers and Allen and Hunter Henry. And honestly, I wouldn't be all that opposed to, if I wanted to wait on quarterback and kind of beef up at wideout and running back, waiting a little bit and getting my Keenan Allen, getting Phil Rivers maybe to be my starter, or maybe a guy I'm going to flip flop, and getting Hunter Henry to be my tight end. Because I think even if Gates comes back, I think Henry's going to outplay him by leaps and bounds anyway. And it might be one of these deals where Gates could be that sneaky red zone guy that Phillip Rivers does like him in the red zone quite a bit, but he's not, as we know, he's not getting any younger. And I think it's just clear that it's kind of Hunter Henry's time, and I think he's going to assert himself as that guy, even if Gates still kind of sticks around. I think they'll do a good enough job of kind of balancing Antonio Gates and getting him in there and keeping him fresh. But I think Hunter Henry, hands down, becomes the guy in 2018.
Yeah, I think the only thing that scares me is if Gates sticks around, that's going to eat into Henry's touchdowns. And, that's certainly a big value for a tight end because they don't always get, 6-8 catches a game. But maybe, again, if they just use Gates in that time frame and he's just there for a father figure and kind of just grooms him for one more year, maybe that's what they'll do. But we'll have to wait and see what the offseason brings for that. So Hunter Henry with our clutch more for the season, for 2017. All right, so here's an interesting one. So this is our annual Comeback Player of the Year. This goes to a tight end who ended 2016 with a poor ranking in total fantasy points and consistency, but kind of rebounded in 2017 and had the greatest improvement in both categories, making him very valuable to his fantasy team. So, Ron, I'll let you throw out the first nominee.
Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit here, and I'm going to throw out one of our more important nominees here. And that's going to be Vernon Davis. And I looked at, when we looked at the different awards here, one of the ones I looked at for the clutch more was Vernon Davis. But I also looked at Jordan Reed as well. And it kind of speaks to, what consistency shows you as far as when a guy is in there actually playing in the game, what our ranking can show you. Because even though Jordan Reed, and I kind of alluded to this before, he's hurt all the time, he's still solid when he's in there, and that's what Vernon Davis was as well. I mean, he had fallen off the map. He went to Denver and just kind of disappeared for a little while, and ended up finding a job. And I think that he ended up becoming a pretty solid player and a pretty decent guy down the stretch, especially if you had injuries at the spot or you needed a bye week spot. And I think that's another thing too, as far as this list. There's a lot of guys on here that seems like they were guys that were able to kind of bail you out if you needed somebody in a bye week, or you needed somebody with an injury, or you needed to save some money in DFS. And Vernon Davis was kind of one of those guys. And, we talked a little bit about, how some of those, the receivers in Washington just kind of disappeared. And he was somebody that kind of emerged a little bit, 43 catches, 648 yards, had 3 touchdowns. And so I don't know if there's necessarily anybody else that really I would even kind of consider for this award that had just been a nobody for 2 years, and all of a sudden kind of burst back on the season and on the scene and had a pretty solid year. So Vernon Davis, to me, there wasn't really anybody else to consider.
Yeah, no, the only guy I thought about nominating was Jack Doyle, just because, in 2016 he was kind of not as well known. There was still, I think Dwayne Allen was still there and was kind of competing with that job for Indianapolis. He only had 44% consistency in 16. 17, he comes back. He's 4th in total points, 67% consistency. So certainly a pretty big jump. But you are correct, sir. The winner is Vernon Davis by a landslide. Just because, again, he was pretty much nowhere to be found in 2016. 21st in total points, 47% clutch rate. to come back and be 15th and then 11th in consistency. And to be honest with you, if you were a Jordan Reed owner, he could have saved your year. Because if you lost Jordan Reed or just gave up on him with the injuries, Davis filled in very well in Jordan Reed's absence, having 9 clutch games for the year. If you got lucky and had Reed in, maybe you picked up a couple at the beginning of the year when Reed was in. But, certainly the combination of those two guys, especially Davis there, could have saved your year. And, and for that, he wins our clutch player of the year at tight end. So, all right, so we come down to our final award, and if this, of course, is our clutch MVP. And again, this goes to the best combination of total fantasy points and consistency. Now, there's a lot of close numbers this year as compared to the past years where, pretty much somebody has ran away with it. I know in 2016, I think it was Gronkowski. I'm double checking. No, it's Kyle Rudolph actually won this last year just because he had a 75% consistency last year. So, like you said, Gronk, could be up this year. Certainly he was a nominee, and I'm assuming Ron, you'll either throw him out or I will. But like I said, Gronk's not always the winner here. So let's take a look. So we'll let you lead off with the first nominee.
Well, I'm definitely not a Gronk guy, so he's not going to be my nominee.
Okay.
The other thing I wanted to say is I'm going to mention my boy Jack Doyle here, and I didn't nominate him for comeback player of the year for clutch reasons because Jack Doyle is always clutch in my heart. And so he's always there for me. So I
Are you related to this guy? I mean, come on.
No, he's a Colt. He's one of the few bright spots the Colts had last season.
That's
so
true. He was
I have to cling on to something as a Colts fan from last year. So and I don't know if it's right as a fan to cling on to the fact that your biggest accomplishment is you fired your head coach and got a new one, and so I don't know if that's a good thing to be proud of or not. But I got to give him a mention here. But my actual nominee though is going to be Zach Ertz, and it's Zach Ertz mainly because of where his ADP was. He was like around ADP number 7. He was a little bit further down, and not to say that he hasn't shown flashes of this the last few years. And we kind of saw the athleticism. We saw that it was hopefully kind of coming down. And we talked in the quarterback podcast about how guys like Carson Wentz are affecting the rest of that offense and kind of helping other guys kind of shine. And I think he definitely did that with Zach Ertz as far as having him kind of have a come out party this year. And not to say, the receptions are pretty consistent throughout the last few seasons. The yards are pretty consistent, but he took a huge leap as far as touchdowns, and he doubled his touchdown output from 2016 from 4 to 8. And I think that kind of shows that confidence that Carson Wentz has in him in the red zone, and that ability to be able to get him the ball, when the various routes that he's running, to throw a touch or throw the jump ball or whatever it may be. So I don't think that Zach Ertz would win this award, but I do think he is definitely worth a mention here. Just as far as if you were able to wait and get him as kind of the 7th tight end off the board, you got some pretty nice production overall at that spot. When you look at what he was able to do with total points, he was the third most clutch guy that we had, and he was also 3rd in total points. He was 79% clutch in the 14 games that he played. So I think overall, he's definitely worth mentioning there. I know, who we cheat, and we know who wins the award already, but definitely worth a mention here just based on his ADP being a little lower than the other guys.
Totally agree, and Zach certainly should be a nominee for MVP. Like you said, he was right up there. I mean, basically, if you had one of the top 3 guys for the season, even though, like you said, they missed a couple games here or there, if you were lucky enough to have Trey Burton as the backup to replace Ertz when he was out, you had even better combination because I think Burton scored 2 or 3 touchdowns in the 2 games he missed, right? I mean, he had some pretty big games if I remember right. So
and for a guy that was behind Zach Ertz, him finishing 24th in our clutch rating it's deceiving because it looks like 5 of 15 he didn't do that well, but when you look at what team he's on and who he played behind, 5 of 15 is pretty damn good. So you'll take that. He's
a free agent, so there's talk that he might he could be a starter somewhere this upcoming season. So could be some sneaky value there for Trey Burton, depending on what team he goes to. Well, I am going to nominate Gronk because, I just got to give Gronk some love. if you got points for just being a party animal, he wins every year anyway. But he isn't. Doesn't get any points for that. But he did end up second in total points, as usual, right up there in the top, 3 in total points. 11 for 14. He missed a couple games, which is pretty standard for him. 79%, so he tied Zach Ertz. So, he's right up there, and I just, I certainly have to give Gronk some love. I mean, there's talk about him possibly retiring and becoming an actor. That may have been, I almost drove off the road when I heard that, especially the actor part.
He's also, WWE is hoping to throw a pile of money in it.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
There
you go. Yeah, because I'm sure, well, he doesn't need the money. I think I read that he's lived off only his endorsement money since he started playing. Every single one of his paychecks for football has went straight into investments. He's spent zero of that. So, gotta love the guy, and if you can retire and you don't have too many brain injuries other than maybe from alcohol blackout, then good for you to go out on top and move forward.
And two things here too. Number one, with all that you just said, he's definitely winning at life right now.
Yeah.
But number two, I highly doubt when Gronk goes out anywhere, he's paid for a drink in probably the last 10 years of his life.
Sure,
I don't think he's paying for a drink anywhere.
Or food or anything.
Nothing.
Exactly.
So he's doing awfully well for himself. He could go pro wrestle for a couple of years and be all right.
Right. He actually might have more concussions in pro wrestling, but we'll see. So I'll let you nominate our winner, though, because those two were not our winner. And I'll let you do the nominations for that.
Okay, and so it's kind of process of elimination here as you're listening to who we're talking about here with Gronk and with Ertz, who's going to be the guy, and it's pretty simple to see. It's going to be Travis Kelce. And Travis Kelce was not, I don't want to say by far the best tight end, but he definitely was the best tight end finally. And it feels like Andy Reid kind of finally figured it out and understood that who he needed to get the ball to, his playmakers, and that's what he did. And so the health was there. He played 15 games, was clutch 12 out of the 15 for 80%. He was also your number one guy in total points as well. And he did it all across the board in both categories. You look at, he's kind of that safety blanket for Alex Smith. And he contributed as well to that season that Alex Smith had, because I don't know if you don't have Travis Kelce there to throw to, you're definitely not going to be having the numbers that Alex Smith had. Right. 83 grabs, over 1,000 yards, 2 years in a row over 1,000 yards, 2 years in a row with 80 grabs. He doubled the touchdown output this year from 4 to 8, another guy that did that. So he just did it all, man, and he was healthy for you. You didn't have to worry about the injuries, and you really don't have to worry about the injuries with him. I mean, he's played since 2014. He's played in 16 games every season except last year. He missed one. So he's going to be a guy that you're going to start week in and week out. He's one of those kind of indispensable players at this position, and there's not a lot of those here. If you wait a certain amount, he's one of those matchup-proof guys that no matter what, he's going to be in there in your DFS or in your seasonal lineup as well. So 122 targets as well. So Smith's looking for him all the time. So it'll be interesting to see what the quarterback position does. But one of the things that you got to like about the tight end position when you have a young quarterback is it's always kind of that safety blanket for that young quarterback to be able to kind of check down to. And so I think that the grabs will be there. The yardage might go down a little bit, but I think the touchdowns and the receptions will still definitely be there. And if you do see a yardage dip, I think it's only going to be minimal. So by far, Travis Kelce, winning this award. But like I said, I don't think it's all that much of a slam dunk. But when you're number one in consistency and you're number one in total points, you're the no-brainer MVP.
Yeah, you win the MVP, but it's certainly not a unanimous choice, like you said. Definitely the closest it's been. Believe it or not, like you said, it's been a few years since Gronk has won, which has always been why every year in the Fantasy Football Consistency Guide, I'm always telling people, don't draft Gronk so early. There's no reason for it. He's good. He's definitely great, but he's not better than Kelce. He's not that much better than Kelce. In fact, he's a little bit worse than Kelce. There's other players like Ertz and Rudolph and them that put up decent consistency, decent numbers that you can get much later, and it's all about value. I mean, so perfect example, let me throw this out to you. In the first mock draft of the year on SiriusXM, and this was a month or so ago, Gronk went in the second round, Kelce went in the third round, Ertz went in the fifth. Who are you drafting?
Jack Doyle.
Of course you are. That is not the answer. No. No, you're right. Well, maybe Jack Doyle a little bit later. Maybe Doyle goes in the 7th. That's a good pick. But I mean, I look at that and go, sorry, man, I'd be taking Ertz in the 5th. I love both Gronk and Kelsey, but on the other hand, if Gronk has got this mindset of, I don't know if I want to play anymore. Let's say he does come back, but let's say week 2 he gets a mild concussion again. What's that going to do to his heart for playing?
Well, and I think you always have to have that in the back of your mind as well.
I know injury can happen to anybody, but I'm just saying.
Yeah. I agree with you there on Ertz, and I think you have to look at the quarterback situation, like I said with Kelsey again. Not to say that I don't think Patrick Mahomes could be solid, because I really liked what I saw from him, but it was a small sample size. But Zach Ertz is right there, with total points and with clutch rating. And so he's not that far behind. It's not that big of a drop off. And if you can wait, like I said a little bit ago, if you can wait a little bit and get a solid tight end, a little bit later, and beef up at receiver and running back, or even maybe get your quarterback out of the way, I think that's no doubt he'd be the next guy to come off the board.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there as well. I was going to look up here under ADP for tight ends where they're sitting at right now in some mock drafts.
Because there's only, when I look at our rankings here, there's only a few guys that I would consider taking even anywhere near Ertz that I might wait on a little bit later. I might, but even if you look at total points, you look at the next couple of guys there's still a good 25-30 point difference there as far as total points. And if you look at our next most consistent guy, Kyle Rudolph was almost 50 points behind. So I think that if you don't get Ertz, you're going to wait a little bit longer. But there's not anybody on that list that I would take anywhere near that slot, and I think he's well worth it. And I think too, the emergence of Carson Wentz puts him right up there as well.
Sure. Well, I'm looking at it again. We're using Fantasy Football Calculator. I'm not sure how perfect or great it is, but it's a spot. So they have Gronkowski at 301, Kelsey at 305. And this is a 12-team league, and Ertz at 406. That makes more sense to me. They're a little bit closer. People are waiting a little bit for both Gronkowski and Ertz. With Ertz in the 4th round, it's a little early for me, but especially 406, because that's early 4th round.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody, because I'm not taking Gronk early. I don't know if I would pay an ultra premium for Kelsey, but I don't think I want to take a tight end there no matter what the deal is.
They have Olsen at 503, which doesn't make any sense to me.
No way. No thanks.
Then Delaney Walker at 508, still a little too early for Walker. Jimmy Graham at 606. Graham, he was better this year, more consistency, but then he had games where he just disappeared. Hunter Henry at 611, might be a little early. See, now Kyle Rudolph at 703, there's where I would jump on that one. And Jack Doyle's at 707, so you got Rudolph and Doyle and Ingram at 801. I'd much rather have one of those 3 guys in 7th, 8th round and get my consistency and good scoring. Like I said, Ingram 6th in total points, 73%. I assume Eli Manning's going to be the quarterback, and if he's not, then maybe this changes. But, because after that, you're getting into the Tyler Eiferts and Ebrons and Howards and Cooks and places we don't want to be. So basically, if you don't get one of the top 11, which, again, should be enough, but I'm not touching Olsen. Like I said, and I'm not touching Jordan Reed. So I'm thinking maybe it's 7th round this year for me with Hunter or with either Rudolph, Doyle, or Ingram. So we'll have to wait and see how those ADPs fall out. I'd like to get Ertz in the 5th. That would be perfect, because that's usually when I would take a top tight end. Because usually by then I've got 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers. I'm pretty well loaded up, and then I can get my tight end there. But like I said, this may be the year just to wait a little bit and grab one of those consistent yet not overwhelming guys. But if Ingram stays where he's been, looks like a good spot to me. But just kind of have to. What are your thoughts?
I'm just kind of looking here at guys that I might wait on, and one of the things too that could benefit Zach Ertz is if Britton leaves town as well. Not to say that Wentz is going to be in there looking for him, more than he is. Zach Ertz, but nonetheless, any help you could get might give him a little bit of a boost. So it might be not a bad thing for him to be going out of town. A guy that I like too, and just he's a freak athlete, number one, but number two, just the addition of an actual quarterback that can throw the ball is George Kittle. George Kittle's a guy that he's a little bit further down on our rankings there as well. He finished 23rd in consistency. He's top 20 in total points though, which isn't all bad considering he's another guy that I doubt was drafted in a lot of formats, if any formats. He finished with over 100 points at the position, and he's one that I think if with Jimmy Garoppolo there, with as solid as he looked, I think he's another guy that could take a step forward. He's definitely a guy that I've got later on that if I'm in a league that's deep enough that I might be able to take a backup, might take a flyer on him. He's definitely not somebody I'm going to wait on to be my number one. But he was another guy too that in a couple weeks last year, and it seemed like this position more than others had those guys that you could plug in a bye week that would kind of bail you out of a spot if you were in there. So he's a guy that I'm kind of looking at, and like I mentioned before, I'm just anxious to see what the rest of the rookie class does with O.J. Howard and David Njoku, especially just to see what if another year, another full off season with Jameis Winston, with O.J. Howard, what that might do, and then just like I said, with whatever the quarterback situation is in Cleveland with David Njoku. But I think those guys are both good enough athletes that if they can learn the position, I think they could be decent contributors. Now, I don't know if you'd see them up at the top of the board, but those are a handful of guys that I'm definitely looking at. And as always too, I got the fantasy football calculator up here as well. I'm going to be very anxious to see where Jordan Reed goes in some of the mocks, in some of the drafts that I do, if people are still willing to pay the high price for him. They have him kind of all the way down at 8 here in their rankings. So I think that's pretty fair. Because he does produce when he's in there, but it's just, like we said before, it's just a question of when is he going to be in there and if he's going to be in there.
Well, going to a couple of the guys you talked about, I think O.J. Howard, I think the key there is Cameron Brate. If Cameron Brate can go somewhere free agency-wise and give Howard the full-time job, then I think Howard certainly has that capability of, doing something more than what he did in 2017. Going to your George Kittle in bits, last 3 games, a perfect 3 for 3 with Garoppolo on hand. So, if you look at, now granted, I know Garoppolo played in 6 games, so you could say he's 3 for 6. Well, that's 50%. And if you get 50%, that's moving you up in the Hunter Henry, Jason Witten type section. That's putting you up there. And, again, if he could get even 60, 70%, that could be a great value for Kittle if, like you said, taking a look at those last 3 games. And I kind of look at that kind of stuff, and obviously when I'm putting the guide together, one of the things when I'm looking for value, especially for players, that didn't look like they had a great season, but you look at I have a chart that has the clutch games by week, and I always look at that kind of second half or last maybe 4 to 6 games of the year to see somebody who might have kind of caught on. And Kittle was, like I said, had 3 there. Ebron was 3 for 4. Jason Witten was 3 for 4. But we know who Jason Witten is and what he does. Jack Doyle 4 for 4 for the last 4 games. So, those are the kind of things you see and go, nice trends. Kittle is the one that jumps out to me as maybe somebody that could create some great value, in the offseason, because he probably will be pretty low ADP-wise. So, definitely we'll be looking at that as well. And, he did a nice job at the end of the year for the 49ers, and with Garoppolo in there, they'll be throwing the ball around a lot, I think, and certainly has some value there as well. So as we come to the end, we have a few minutes left. Anybody else jump out at you maybe that we didn't talk about or give an award to? I think one guy that I would like to bring up is Jimmy Graham. I had him in a few leagues because his value was kind of lower than normal. He did nice. He had, ranked 7th in, total points, 9th in 63%, 9th in clutch games. But here's the thing that kind of bothered me about Jimmy Graham. He earned all 10 of the clutch games straight. Week 3, week 13. Week 14, 15, 16, 17, when I needed him most, sucked.
Yeah.
So my question is, what happened to Jimmy Graham and Russell Wilson? They're clicking all year, and at the end of the year, kind of falls off the face of the earth and doesn't do much and kills, guys like me that was relying on him. I'm kind of a little worried going into next year with him. Seattle is Seattle. Russell Wilson's Russell Wilson. They need a running game badly. Paul Richardson kind of started coming to his own. We all know Doug Baldwin certainly was more consistent last year than he has been. I'm a little worried that Jimmy Graham may be, again, kind of like Greg Olson, seeing the end of his career kind of stumbling in and maybe stumbling out at this point. What are your thoughts on Jimmy Graham and that scenario?
Well, and one of the things, too, is, when you think about some of the games that Russell Wilson had last year, I mean, he had some monster weeks, and he had some monster games that he put up some big-time stats, and if you were able to get him as your quarterback, you really reap the benefits from that. But it's one of those things as to where I kind of wonder, where Jimmy Graham went some of those weeks, because you expected him to kind of be part of that. But you said as well, after week 13, he didn't necessarily have a clutch game. But if you look at what Russell Wilson did kind of down the stretch there, he got a lot of those big games out kind of in the middle of the season. You look at week 15 and 16, he had 142 and 93 yards. And then he ended the season with 221, and so that kind of goes to show you right there. It might have been a little bit,
hand.
Yeah, it goes together. So I agree with the running game as well. If a team you're playing, and pretty common sense here, if a team you're playing does one thing well, that's what you're going to shut down. So I think a lot of these teams are like, what, we're going to try to shut Jimmy Graham down. You're going to have to beat us on the ground, and they're not able to do that. So I think it's something with, if that'll really help them out quite a lot if they can get a competent running back in there that can actually be consistent. That's kind of what we preach here. If they can get a guy that they can actually hand the ball to and does something and can put up 100 yards here and there and be a threat, in the red zone and be a threat to catch the ball out of the backfield, it opens up a lot for him. So I do think a lot of it does depend upon that, and I don't know if they have the guy there that is going to be able to do that necessarily. I was a pretty big CJ Pro-size guy, and he just can't stay on the field. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do there. But I don't know if it's so much a knock on anything Jimmy Graham's doing as it is. I think it's just kind of, the way the offense goes is the way that Russell Wilson goes in a way.
All right. No, you're right, and I think that certainly you can tell by looking at the clutch games by week. So good analysis there. All right, well, hey, we're hitting here the end of the time frame. So, Ron, thanks again for helping us pass out awards over the last 4 weeks to the 4 positions. Starting next week, we will be getting kind of do a year in review. It's going to be a little bit different than the awards. We're going to really break down some players, really look at some guys that we think might be up and coming for 2018 or might be falling in 2018. So we're going to kind of do a 2017 year in review. Just kind of look at each position, break it down, and by position, and just kind of help you guys out, just to understand a little bit. And we're also going to kind of help you understand the consistency idea and why it's important and why you should look into that. So join us for that. We will be back next week on Sunday night as always. So thanks again for listening. Ron, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you at?
You can find me in full-on baseball mode as far as the writing aspect at Big Guy Fantasy Sports. I'll be putting up some helping you out a little bit with some maybe some basic sabermetric stuff to take into your draft as well. I'll be doing a sabermetric notebook, and another thing I'm gonna help you out a little bit with as well is I'm gonna find you some value in your baseball auction draft, and you'll be able to find me next week here, same bat time, same bat channel, talking.
And
about,
you can find him. You can also find Ron on the Nasty Cast.
Yes, sir.
With Nathan Dokken, Van Lee. These guys do a great job. So please find them on Fantrax Radio. The Nasty Cast is a great baseball podcast to listen to each week. So you only need 2, Nasty Cast for baseball, and you need the consistency show here for football. So Ron, did you say Twitter? If you did, I missed it.
No, I didn't get. You got to have 3 podcasts too, because we also do the Fantrax Dynasty Baseball as well. So we help you out when you're drafting your minor leaguers and also in your yearly format as well. So you're allowed to listen to 3, but no more than that.
That's it.
You can find me at Twitter at TheRealMade. Any fantasy football stuff, any fantasy baseball stuff, hit me up, ask me questions, and I will do my best to answer them.
Awesome. And you can find me at Bob_Lung at Big Guy Fantasy Sports on Twitter. And right now, some new stuff popping up on Big Guy Fantasy Sports. Kind of a little new concept. I've done a little twist with consistency, and I'm calling it the X consistency. So if you're a baseball guy, it's kind of like the XERA, giving you a little bit truer picture of how consistent players are and how to separate those guys that are similar in consistency or similar in total points. So check that out. Quarterback and running back articles are up, so check that out on Big Guy Fantasy Sports. So for Ron Rigney, this is Bob Lung. Everybody have a great week, and we will see you next Sunday.